Close your eyes and picture a Viking. Go on. I'll wait. You've got him, right? Big guy, beard like a hedge, furs, an axe in one hand, a horn of mead in the other, and, most importantly, a helmet with two enormous horns sticking out the sides. Here's the thing. Almost everything in that picture is wrong, not exaggerated, not, it's complicated. Wrong. And the most famous part, the horns, wasn't invented by a Viking, by a Norseman, or by anyone within 800 years of the actual Viking Age. It was invented by a German opera costume designer in the 1870s to solve a lighting problem on a stage. I'm not here to make you feel stupid for believing it. You believed it because everyone believes it. Your textbooks, your cartoons, your Halloween aisle, your football team. This is one of the most successful pieces of accidental misinformation in modern history. So let's take it apart piece by piece and figure out what these people were actually like. Because the truth is genuinely more interesting than the cartoon. Let's give the myth its due, because it didn't come from nowhere. The story we all absorbed goes like this. The Vikings were a race of savage northern raiders, filthy, illiterate, permanently angry. They poured out of Scandinavia with no warning, burned down monasteries, drank out of skulls, and left. They were a people defined entirely by violence, basically a weather event with beards. And honestly, you can see why that stuck. The Viking Age does open with one of the most quotable acts of violence in medieval history. The raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne, off the coast of northern England in the year 793. Monks slaughtered, treasures hauled off, and a generation of horrified churchmen scribbling that the end of days had clearly arrived. And the panic was loud. The most famous reaction comes from a scholar named Alcuin, an Englishman working at the court of Charlemagne, who wrote letters practically vibrating with horror. Never before had such a terror appeared in Britain, that kind of thing. When the people writing your press releases are terrified monks whose friends you've just killed, you can see how mindless savage becomes the official record. The Vikings didn't write the first drafts of their own history. Their victims did. And those victims had a motive to exaggerate. A burning monastery makes a better story, and a better excuse for asking the king for money and soldiers. Then, some traitors turned up and things got out of hand. The horror was real, but it was also useful. Keep that idea in your back pocket. It comes back at the end. So the violence is real. That part isn't the myth. The myth is the idea that violence is the whole story, that Viking describes a kind of person, a savage barbarian type, rather than a thing some people occasionally did. And the myth has a mascot, that horned helmet. Keep it in your mind because it's about to fall apart first. Here's the crack. The fact that doesn't fit. In over 2 centuries of digging up Viking graves, settlements, ships, battlefields, and rubbish heaps across half of Europe, archaeologists have found exactly one complete helmet that we can confidently call Viking. One, it was found in 1943 by a farmer clearing a field at a place called Kjermunbu in Norway, and it dates to the 10th century. And it has no horns. It's a neat rounded iron cap with a little mask around the eyes that makes the wearer look a bit like he's wearing iron glasses. Practical. Sensible. The opposite of theatrical. In 200 years of archaeology, not a single horned Viking helmet has ever been dug up. Not one. They don't exist because they never existed. So where did the horns come from? Buckle up, because this is the best part. In 1876, the composer Richard Wagner staged his giant opera cycle, The Ring of the Nibelung, in Germany. His costume designer was a man named Karl Emil Doppler, needed the Norse characters to read as wild and ancient and primal from the back row of a dark theater, so he stuck horns on their helmets. That's it. That's the origin of the most famous Viking image on Earth, a 19th century stage designer's mood lighting. The horns then spread through illustrated history books, children's stories, cruise line menus, cartoons, and eventually onto the side of an American football team's helmets. an entire civilization's reputation, accessorized by a guy who never met one. Let me introduce you to two people. They're invented composites, but every detail about how they live comes from the actual record. Meet Thorvald. Thorvald is what you'd call a Viking, except he'd have no idea what you meant. He's a farmer. He grows barley on a strip of land in a fjord. He keeps a few cows and some grumpy sheep, and he spends roughly 11 months of the year worrying about the weather like every farmer who has ever lived. He has never burned a monastery. He's never seen a monastery. Once, when he was younger and the harvest was bad and his cousin had a boat, Thorvald spent a single summer going Viking. Because here's the secret hiding in the word itself. To the Norse, Viking wasn't who you were. It was something you did. A Vikinger was a man on a raiding trip. To go Viking was to go off adventuring by sea. It was a seasonal side hustle, a gap year with violence. Most men who did it went back to the barley. Now meet Gudrid. Gudrid is Thorvald's wife, and in a lot of ways she runs the operation. When Thorvald is away, trading down a river, fishing, or off on that one ill-advised summer, Gudrid holds the keys. Literally. Keys are a status object found in women's graves, the symbol of who controlled the household stores. She manages the farm, the workers, the money, and the winter. She is not a delicate background figure. She is the chief operating officer of everything Thorvald owns. Thorvald's micro-arc, if you want one. He goes raiding once, hates being cold and wet and far from home, comes back, and spends the rest of his life telling a slightly exaggerated version of the story at feasts, which, if we're honest, is the most relatable Viking behavior imaginable. But let's stay with Gudrid for a second because she breaks the cartoon even harder than the helmet does. In Norse society, a woman could own property, and she could initiate a divorce. And if she did, she walked away with the wealth she'd brought into the marriage. It wasn't necessarily easy or common, and it wasn't equality. A wealthy man could keep more than one woman, but the right existed. In a 9th century European context, a woman who can divorce her husband and keep her own property is genuinely striking. Arab and Christian observers alike were startled by how much freedom Norse women had. While much of the rest of the continent treated women as the property in the transaction, Gudrid is a party to the contract. A Viking woman could divorce her husband and walk away with her own wealth. In the 800s. That's not a detail, so that's a different civilization than the one in the cartoon. And we're not just inferring this from law codes. We dig up the evidence. There are wealthy women's graves loaded with status goods, the grandest of all being the Oseberg ship burial in Norway, an entire ocean-going ship buried as a tomb for 2 women stuffed with treasure. You don't bury someone in a ship like that unless she mattered enormously. So when you picture Thorvald's household, don't picture him as the boss and her as the furniture. Picture a partnership where, for a third of the year, she's in sole command. Now it's your turn. You're not Thorvald. You're you. Dropped into his world for one ordinary morning. No raid, no battle, just a normal day. It's a gray dawn in a Norwegian fjord. You wake up in a longhouse, one long, smoky room, a fire down the middle, animals breathing at the far end, the whole family and the farmhands packed in under one turf roof. It smells of wood smoke, wet wool, and livestock. Your back hurts. Everyone's back hurts. You get up, and the first thing you reach for is a comb. Not for vanity. Well, partly for vanity. But because grooming is a genuine daily ritual here, and combs are so common in the graves that archaeologists practically trip over them. Bone, antler, often carved, sometimes carried in their own little case. You drag it through your hair and beard. You check your nails. There are tweezers and ear scoops for that too. It's not Saturday, so you're not having your bath today. That's a weekly event, bøynein, and the Old Norse word for Saturday, lagerdager, literally means washing day. The day is named after the bath. Imagine being so committed to one weekly wash that it gets baked into the calendar forever. You step outside. Your world is not a frozen wasteland of constant war. It's mud, barley, the sea, and a to-do list. You'll mend a fence. You'll worry about a sick cow. You'll eat porridge, fish, bread, maybe some skyer. A yogurtish thing Icelanders still eat today. And if a stranger comes up the fjord, your first instinct isn't to grab an axe. It's to wonder if he's here to trade. Because trade is the engine of this whole world, far more than raiding ever was. Reach into the pouch on your belt, and there's a decent chance you're carrying a silver coin minted over 3,000 miles away, in the Islamic Caliphate, in Baghdad. Norse traders moved furs, amber, walrus ivory, and, uncomfortably, enslaved people down the great rivers of what's now Russia and Ukraine, and brought back tons of Arab silver. Your spare change is a souvenir from a civilization you'll never see. Now look down the shoreline at the boat pulled up on the beach. That's the actual superweapon. Not the axe, the boat. A Viking longship could cross open ocean, and then, because it barely needed any depth of water, sail straight up a shallow river into the middle of a country. It's the reason these farmers ended up in Baghdad's silver in Newfoundland, in Constantinople and Paris. You're standing next to the most important piece of technology in the early medieval North, and to you, it's just the boat. Okay. Quick recap before the evidence, because this is the spine of the whole thing. The cartoon says, Vikings were filthy, horn-helmeted savages defined by violence. The record says they were groomed, helmetless in the horned sense, mostly farmers and traders, with raiding as one seasonal job among several. Now, let me back that up with named sources, because I'm not asking you to take my word for it. On the grooming, we have a glorious piece of testimony. An English chronicler named John of Wallingford, writing in the 13th century, was still annoyed, of generations after the fact, about how the Danish settlers in England behaved. And his complaint is not what you'd expect. He grumbles that the Danes were too clean. They were stealing English women, he says, through the unfair advantage of personal hygiene. Here's roughly what he wrote, and I'm quoting, "They were wont, after the fashion of their country, to comb their hair every day, to bathe every Saturday, to change their garments often, and to set off their persons by many such frivolous devices." Frivolous devices. He means combs. The man is mad about combs. Now, in the spirit of not selling you a new myth, here's the counter evidence, because honest history includes the bits that complicate your story. An Arab diplomat called Ibn Fadlan met a group of Norse traders on the Volga River in the 10th century, and he was horrified by them. He describes them all washing their faces and hair from the same shared basin of water, each man spitting and blowing his nose into it before passing it on. He called them the filthiest of God's creatures. So, which is it? Clean or filthy? The answer is the genuinely interesting one. Hygiene is relative. To an Englishman who bathed rarely, the weekly washing, daily combing Norse looked impossibly fancy. To Ibn Fadlan, who came from a culture of running water ritual, washing several times a day, sharing a basin was disgusting. Both men are telling the truth about the same people. The Vikings weren't supernaturally clean. They were just cleaner than the folks writing them down, and which is the exact opposite of the dirty barbarian myth. And on the bigger point, that most of them were farmers and traders, not raiders. That's not a fringe revision. It's the mainstream scholarly position now. The people of Viking Age Scandinavia were overwhelmingly agricultural, and the raiding minority were doing it part-time. 2 more facts to nail the coffin shut on the mindless savage idea. First, around the year 1000, Norse explorers from Greenland reached the coast of North America, a place the sagas call Vinland, roughly 500 years before Columbus. We're not guessing from legend. There's a confirmed Norse settlement site at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, discovered in 1960 and excavated through that decade. Recent dating even pins the Norse there to the year 1021, almost exactly 1,000 years ago. Mindless savages do not casually cross the North Atlantic in open boats. Vikings reached North America around the year 1000, And we've dug up the buildings to prove it. Columbus was 5 centuries late. Second, they did government. The Icelandic Althing, founded around 930, is one of the oldest surviving parliaments on the planet. A yearly open-air assembly where free men gathered to make law and settle disputes by argument instead of by axe. The cartoon barbarian who can't read or reason somehow invented a working legislature before most of Europe got around to it. So here's the part worth arguing about over dinner. We didn't end up with the horned barbarian by accident. That image got useful. In the 19th century, as Wagner's horned warriors marched off the stage and into the culture, a romantic, nationalist idea of a noble, fierce, racially pure, Germanic ancestor was being actively built, and the wild horned Viking fit it perfectly. The cartoon wasn't just a costume mistake. It was a flattering mirror somebody wanted to look into. And we still do it. Every time Viking gets slapped on something to mean pure aggression, a sports mascot, a workout brand, a tough guy aesthetic, a political movement borrowing Norse runes for menace, we're choosing the opera costume over the actual people. We're picking the version that lets us feel something simple about a group who were, in reality, complicated. Traders, poets, explorers, farmers, lawmakers, and yes, sometimes raiders. Which raises an honest question, and I genuinely like your answer in the comments. When a culture's real history is duller and richer than its myth, why do we keep reaching for the myth? Who does the cartoon actually serve? Here's where I'll leave Thorvald. He's back from his one summer of adventure, sitting by the fire, combing his beard, telling everyone the raid was far more dramatic than it was. The horns he's definitely not wearing. The reputation he never asked for is still 800 years away. The Vikings don't need the horns. They sailed to North America 5 centuries before Columbus. They built law courts and trade routes stretching from Baghdad to Newfoundland. They wrote poetry so dense it makes your head spin. They were people. And people are always more interesting than monsters. So the next time someone hands you the horned helmet, you don't have to argue. Just smile and tell them about the comb. That's the real Viking flex. Thanks for watching. Stay curious and stay combed.